All right. Well, good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to this session of the Lakota Board of Education, this work session of the Lakota Board of Education. Ms. Logan, would you please call roll?
Mrs. Casper? Here. Mrs. O'Connor? Here. Mr. Pearl?
Here.
Mrs. Schaefer? Here. Mr. Lovell?
Here. We don't have the pledge on here, but if everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I would like to have a moment of discussion.
Okay.
I would really appreciate it if when we're having our board meetings, a lot of times we don't put what the board work session is about. So if we could put a topic there, I think that would be really useful to our community to understand what it is we'll be discussing for the evening.
Okay. Thank you. We'll make note for next time. Ms. Logan?
Mrs. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell?
Yes. This evening, we do have a board work session. We have two items that we're going to be discussing. The first, we have our draft 5-year forecast that Ms. Logan will be going over. And then secondarily, we will be doing our board development. And we have Ms. Donna Andrew with us this evening. So we're really excited about that. So we'll pass it off to Ms. Logan first for the 5-year forecast. Is that okay?
Sure.
Or do you want to do it differently?
No, we can. So we can get her out.
Just, yeah,
sooner?
absolutely. Yep. Yep. No, that's perfect.
Mhm.
Yep. I just assumed you'd be quick, Ms. Logan.
No, you can go right ahead.
Not a problem at all. Sounds great. You're on.
I don't think our mic's on. There you go. Am I on? Yep.
You are.
All right, fantastic. Can everybody hear me okay with the mic and the mask?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right,
A
fantastic.
little muffled.
So thank you. It's an honor to be here with you. I spent some time on my way down here thinking about this presentation and how important it is. My topic for you is the board's role, understanding the role, the policies associated with boardsmanship and being a member of a board, your school board policies. Of course, we like to throw in laws because there's lawyers whose livelihoods depend upon it. And then this notion of kind of what happens if you're not operating kind of as a well-oiled machine. I heard a quote once from somebody describing boardsmanship. What does it mean to be on a board? And I really loved this description, which is that when you serve on a board, you're serving an institution of some sort, okay? And you have to think of yourself as the institution and its administration being one engine on a superjet and the board being the other engine on the superjet. You can't operate at 35,000 feet unless both engines are operating really well. And I think that's a great description. But I also think, quite frankly, that if we were sitting in this room on October, 26th of 2019, and I described to you the idea that you would spend 2020 with almost all remote learning for part of the year, that China would be a villain in this notion of a pandemic that goes worldwide, that we would be suffering the economic downturn that we suffered, that we would be dealing with the nonstop bad news that we've been dealing with. Everybody would have looked at the person who was saying it and say, you are out of your mind. You're crazy. It's not going to happen. And yet here we are in October of 2020, looking back at the strangest year that any of us have ever been through. I have been serving as board counsel for 21 years, only school districts in the state of Ohio, but I have only been a public sector attorney. Before that, I served the police department in the city of Cleveland. And before that, I served a public utility in the state of Ohio. And one thing that is true about serving public entities is that an economic downturn has significant consequences on the bottom line. And the people who sit in these two seats end up having to think fast. There's a lot going on beneath the water. Perfect little duck running around the pond, right? But there's a lot going on because they are getting hit with nonstop information. There was the budget cuts. In the midst of all of this, there is all of the news going on regarding the cost to school districts with Ed Choice. There is the downturn in tax receipts because of the downturn in the economy. There is a variety of things that are happening all at once. So that plane is going along at 35,000 feet. You got one engine that's frantically doing everything it can to go from in-person learning to remote learning. And then the other side of the plane is this group right here. And this group right here has to be as efficient and as effective as possible, doing the most beautiful work that a board can do, which is determining how best to serve the children in public education. You know, when you think about our origin, how did we get here? How did we get to 2020 sitting here? And quite frankly, it was because of rooms smaller than the one we're sitting in, where the four walls of a schoolhouse were dedicated to the education of kids. And these giant institutions that we have now spread out across the state of Ohio, the school districts, the educational service centers, the JVS centers, all of the different entities that serve school districts grew up out of the idea that we can put kids in a room and we can prepare them for their future. And we can give them what they need to do that. I salute everybody in this room. Michael, congratulations. There's a lot of people who would joke and say they would have jumped in front of you to save you from this, but I couldn't disagree with that more. I think that this is a fantastic opportunity to serve the community, to serve the kids, to look around you once your quote unquote service is done and say, I left this better than I found it. And I think we have to approach every day that way. As I walked in the building, I saw all these really beautiful signs. The one that's right out there, there's actually multiple signs. It says, you can't control what happens, but you can't control how you respond to it, right? And then I went into the restroom, and every door is painted with an inspirational quote. And I walked through the door that said, be the best you can be today. And I think that that's the message I want to start with. It's the way I start every day in serving schools, because I know when the phone rings with a myriad of issues. I mean, you just never know what's going to come in from a public school district. I can tell you that right now. You want to be as responsive as you can be, because at the end of the day, the outcome of every single thing we do affects the kids coming through the door with backpacks on their backs, just hoping to have the best day they can have. So let's start with that approach, and let's get right into this. All right, school boards, what are you? What on earth is this group of 5 people? Well, quite frankly, you are what's known in the legal world as a creature of statute. That means that until the Ohio General Assembly passed a law creating you, you did not exist. But once you were created, you have an entire book of the Ohio Revised dedicated to you. So again, Michael, congratulations. There's a lot of information behind doing this job, behind being a school board member. So you have Chapter 33 of the Ohio Revised Code, which confers your authority. Basically, what that means is you exist as a creature of statute. You have certain powers as the 5 of you. Again, one of the engines on the plane. you have certain powers as the 5 of you. Those powers dissipate when you dissipate. When you leave the room and you leave the body to act together, then as individuals, you don't have the same authority that you have as a board. That's important to start with. Let's talk about your board bylaws. Now, in the old days, when I started in this business, school board policies were giant 3-ring binders. And when I say giant, I mean they literally were this big. And somebody would come in and drop the giant binder in front of you when you were a new board member and say, okay, that's a little light reading. You need to kind of digest that to let you know what kind of governs the Board of Education. Now they're all online. So you can't even really get a sense of how much is in that board policy, because if an issue comes up or if some questions come up and you need to go to the board policy, so to speak, you look at it and it doesn't quite have the same effect on you being online as it does when you look at that large book. But I did take a look at a couple of your board policies to bring to this presentation. And if you look at 122, which is your first board policy, let's see here. 122. Does that sound something I needed to know about? Okay, all right, good. All right, board powers. So again, your board powers is board policy number 0122. It's a bylaw about the Board of Education. The Board of Education shall be a body politic, which I already said, and corporate. Now, the reason those words are used is it means you can sue and be sued. It conveys upon you that power. You can contract and be contracted with, acquiring, holding, possessing, and disposing of real and personal property, taking and holding in trust for the use and benefit of the district, any grant or devise of land, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it means you're a small corporation. Your CEO is sitting here, your CFO is sitting here. They're called superintendents and treasurers in public schools, but basically that's what you are. Is you're a corporation, and instead of making widgets, you're making little minds that grow up to be bigger minds that grow on that go on to great things. So moving on to the next relevant board policy is member powers. 122.1. Whoops, too fast. So I think the purpose of this policy is to convey to you the difference between working together and working separately, and what that means. Board members as individuals do not separately possess the powers that reside in the whole. The whole is not, or the individual is not the same as the whole in terms of its power, except when, and as expressly authorized by law, or this board, but no member shall be denied facts and materials required for the proper performance of their duties to which they are legally entitled. If, in the opinion of the superintendent or treasurer, a board member's request for information is administratively unreasonable and or represents significant expense in time or material, said request shall be referred to the board for disposition. The superintendent and the treasurer shall be directed by the board's ruling. Now, basically what this goes to is the idea that you have to operate as a group. You have to gather and digest as much information as you can to make the best educated decisions that you possibly can as a group. But at the end of the day, the purpose and the goal of the administration is to do what? Educate the kids. This second paragraph kind of grows up from the notion that there have been folks who don't really understand that there's only so many hours in the day. We have a certain number of waking hours, a certain number of sleeping hours, and within there is your working hours. And everybody needs to be able to accomplish that. So the thought behind your this was adopted in 2013, your board policy here is you have to have the information, you have to gather. That's the beauty of these work sessions that you create, is you can gather as much information through the work sessions as you can to make decisions, and then independently gather things as long as it's reasonable in terms of the burden that you place on your administration. and then make the best decision you can. So what are we talking about with regard to the board's role generally? Board's role generally is that big book that I talked about. That's your world. That's what you create. It's what you adopt. It's what you finesse over time. Most school districts work with entities that produce board policy. They work very closely with school districts. Yours happens to be Neola. There's other ones out there. And what they do is they take the laws that are passed by the legislature, or in many cases, the federal government, and they churn those into required policies or guidance policies that you then consider, modify possibly for your local preferences, and then you pass and adopt those policies, which then you look at these two over here and say, okay, we've set the policy. Matt, Jenny, please go and implement our policy so that we can see our policies at work within the district. And then you have the additional role then of looking back, coming back to it, and determining whether or not it's actually implementing your vision. Is your vision for the district being implemented? Or does the policy need tweaking, modifying? And there's a variety of ways to do that. Sometimes, in order to modify the policy, you have to look at communicating with your legislature to modify the law, because it might not be within your hands directly to change the policy that has come down from the legislature. So establishing board policy. Next thing, obviously, hiring the superintendent and treasurer. The superintendent and the treasurer are your only two direct hires. You put tremendous faith, and they have tremendous responsibility to implement that policy and to run the best school district that they possibly can within the means that you have. The means, of course, is Jenny's area, and then the implementation and the outcomes are Matt's area. So it's obviously an incredibly daunting operation, but really below these two, it's Matt's responsibility to take care of the other ones, to make recommendations to this board for hiring, and then for you to look at his recommendations and approve them. Approve contracts. Obviously, everything in this room, there's some kind of contract behind it. The tables, the carpet, the wall hanging. It takes contracts and purchase agreements and things of that sort to make school districts run. That's another area. Hiring personnel based on the superintendent's recommendation. I already mentioned that. Approving appropriation measures. Of course, you know that probably one of the biggest challenges for school districts in the state of Ohio is looking out at the community and determining local tax needs, taking the money from the money that you receive from the state, and determining the best way to utilize it to really provide the best education you can with it. So looking carefully at those appropriation measures, determining, again, with your policy is also going to be is also going to come goals and what your goals are, and money, excuse me, money has to fit so that you can determine what goals you want to achieve. Meeting the fiduciary responsibility basically means spending the money wisely, being careful to make sure that at the end of anyone's tenure, you haven't bankrupted a school district. Everybody wants to have the finest things and give kids the most opportunity, but at the end of the day, there is a number, and that number you need to work within. Holding hearings is authorized by law. Oftentimes, the treasurer holds the annual hearings regarding the appropriations, and it's important to look at, again, being responsible with the tax dollars and handling that. Probably the largest area for the learning curve for board members is understanding school finance. I can tell you that those school districts that have board members that take the time to understand and to actually listen to the treasurer's presentations, it works a lot better if you understand how the money's being spent and what the numbers mean, than simply trusting at all times, because you have to have a sense of what things cost from top to bottom, so you know what you're approving, and you're approving things in an informed manner, and you can really rely on your treasurer in terms of asking some of those questions to get there. Then avoiding micromanaging. When you have spent the time to hire the people that you have sitting in this room, micromanaging it means something different to everybody, okay? Certainly does. It means something different to everybody. And I think that what it means is being able to have trust and faith in the talent of the people that you hired. And to know that once you establish that big picture policy from above and you tell them what you want to accomplish, having the trust and the faith in them to get there, and in each other, to know that you're going to be able to communicate through these questions of what our outcomes are. What is our goal? What are our outcomes going to be? How are we going to get there? And how do we make sure that Matt and Jenny have the tools they need within our powers and our role to get those things done? All right, board staff communications. Now, this is one I get a lot of questions about. Again, I've been representing school districts for a long time, so I've dealt with a lot of different situations. And one thing that I find that does create tension in the buildings is when board members are communicating directly to staff about their specific jobs, what they do, how they do it. That is something that has created enough tension, if you will, over the years that we have board policies on it. And I've seen lots of different board policies on this subject. They look different. Some have specific guidelines in them. Some have specific prohibitions in them. Some have specific restrictions in them. Yours is board policy 0148.1. The Board of Education desires to maintain open channels of communication between itself and the staff. I am a huge proponent of communication. I don't think that we can do what we do without communication, but it is within certain parameters that just simply have to exist. All official communications, policies, and directives of the board of staff interest and concern to the staff will be communicated through the superintendent. He's the CEO. He's the one who sits between you and the staff. He implements your policy and communicates the different guidelines, requirements, curriculum through his principals, the operations policies through his principals and his other administrators. Very, very important in terms of just a communication protocol. Both staff and board members share an interest in the schools and in education generally, and it is to be expected that when they interact at social affairs and other functions, they will informally discuss such matters as educational trends, issues, innovations, and general activities of the district. However, since individual board members are not authorized to act on behalf of the board unless an open public session or when specifically vested with that authority, it will be considered to be unacceptable conduct for board members to discuss individual personalities, personnel matters and grievances, or other complaints with members of the staff. Staff members are encouraged to utilize the procedures established in board policy or the collective bargaining agreements to have their concerns, complaints, or grievances addressed. Obviously, this makes sense in terms of that bottom-up communication through protocols. It helps everybody involved. I once told a board member who listed their cell phone number in the midst of a district crisis and said, "Call me if you need to discuss this." and he had to change his cell phone number within a couple of weeks, okay? You have to understand that there is a way to handle things. You want, of course, each of you became board members because you're connected to this community. Okay, you don't become a board member of a school district unless you are genuinely connected and genuinely want to serve. So that means in the grocery store, at Home Depot, you know, walking around the car lot with your teenager, you're going to have people come up to you and want to talk to you about their specific goals and agendas. It is so important to be a good listener, but once they communicate to you, know that the best answer 9.99 times out of 10 is going to be, you know, I'm going to have to refer you to the superintendent, or if you absolutely know it's a building level issue, I'm going to have to refer you to the principal, because otherwise the principal or the superintendent are going to have to dig through what your response was and then figure out if that was right or if there's more follow-up that has to be done. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it is always with the best intentions. What's that saying? No good deed goes unpunished, right? My partner Kevin says that. He had it up on his computer screen back when our screensavers were real simple. He had that floating across his screen for years. And I was just amazed at how many times that was proven correct. And I think with board members, it's a good example where you want to have the answers for community members when they come to you. You want to be able to solve their concerns, but you have the experts at your fingertips to direct those folks to. And if Mr. Miller isn't the right person, if he's not the guy, then he knows who to send them to. So just don't be afraid to do it that way. That way everybody knows how this is going to unfold. Okay. On 20 considerations for being a good board member. Now, when it comes to the 20 considerations, these are not my original thoughts. I didn't come up with them. You have a wonderful, wonderful organization, which I'm a member of. I think you're all a member of, the OSBA. You know, part of the horror of 2020 is this is the first time in 20 years. This would have been my 21st OSBA. We're not doing it in person. Wednesday, I'm recording my session. I'm speaking on Ed Choice. But it's going to be virtual this year, and it's just so strange that we're not all going to get together because that networking opportunity, the camaraderie of being down there is so special, and it's such a sad way to end the year to not be able to do that. So hopefully next year we'll be past this and we'll be getting back together again and shaking hands again instead of bumping elbows. I don't know. I think there's some people who will never shake hands again in their life, but I know I miss it. So this comes from a publication that they did in 2017. They probably updated it from time to time, but I think it all just rings absolutely true. I want to go through it with you. Obviously, I'm going to skip the ones that I've already kind of addressed, but really getting back to that idea of operating as a board and not 5 individuals. You know, again, it wasn't my original idea. I really do think that the notion of the jet plane with the 2 engines is something that you can come back to in your mind when you're thinking about the situation that these 2 are trying to implement whatever it is. I mean, think of what they have had to keep at 35,000 feet this year. The remote learning, bringing back a reopen plan, organizing meals for kids who couldn't come to school because of the original stay-at-home order. All of the things that had to happen and had to keep going despite the situation that we found ourselves in. So it suddenly got a lot harder for all the superintendents and treasurers in the state to keep that plane at 35,000 feet. But they did it. And it was amazing to see. It was so beautiful to see everybody getting in that boat and rowing and doing what had to be done for kids. So number 3 on page 3 is limit second guessing. All of this is the human element. All of this is, we have how many people in this room? 5, 6, 7. I mean, all of us are sitting in here, 8 of us, and we each come from somewhere different. We each bring a different talent to the table. We each have a different way of looking at it. But isn't that the beauty of what a Board of Education is it's bringing in all of the different ideas to solve the problems that come. And 2020 has been that perfect storm of problems to solve. And those boards that have seen success, I think those are the ones who operate as a board, limit second guessing of administrators, because at the end of the day, we're all human. Mistakes were made across the state. Just because this was the first time anybody did this. This is not something that we just went, oh, here, let me grab this book off the shelf. Okay. All right, now let's go back to how we did this last time. Never happened before, and yet everybody was doing the best they could for kids. So, as far as those types of understanding, mistakes happen, everybody does better the next day. I'm not speaking to any specific mistakes here, but I'm sure there was probably some things that were done in, say, March or April that now in October we might do a little differently. Act and expect others to act in the best interest of all the district's kids. That seems so obvious. Always looking at the big picture, always looking at the forest, not the tree trunk. If you walked up to a tree trunk and stared at it, you'd think, oh, look, there's a little obstacle in my way and I can walk around it. You could miss the whole thing. There is so much more to this service than just specific smaller interests. You're looking at the best interest of the whole district. Except that sometimes change is necessary and positive. Well, if 2020 taught us anything, it taught us that, right? I don't know about always positive, but regardless of whether it's positive or negative, you can bank on it. Change is going to happen, and this group has to adopt. Sometimes you have to adopt quickly. So what do you do with that if you have to adopt and change quickly? You get as much information as you can, as quickly as you can, and you trust the people who give it to you. And you do the best you can with that information. Rejecting the demands of special interests. Every community has their own little groups that feel like they need extra attention. In many communities across the state, it's the sports boosters. If I get a phone call and it starts with something about a coach, I usually roll up my sleeves. That if it's about a coach, it's going to take a little time and it's going to be a little bit of a hot subject. Other interests have to do with property and locations and taxes and abatements and businesses and fights over businesses and where they're going to go and who's going to get them, and tax levies and new shopping centers and all of these different things that come into play for school districts because they affect your bottom line, they affect how much you're going to have to spend on your kids, and they affect generally the community's morale towards your schools, right? I mean, there's so many different things. The best way to deal with special interests is really quite simple, is refer them to the people who need to deal with them, but always remember that the only special interest that matters is the ones that come through the door with the backpacks on their back, right? I mean, those are the special interests that we really have to watch out for. Makes it so easy, so simple, but sometimes getting through and wading through some of those issues that you run into in this world, it takes work, it takes patience, it takes trust, it takes faith, and it takes communication. Value, trust, and respect your fellow board members for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Every single one of us in this room brings a different personality and a different gift to the school district. I think that that's the beauty of a board. It's a beauty of this method of governance, is that we have our own special talents to bring. No one person, if Brad was the only person, it was the board president, it was the only guy, and then it was these two, it would be so much harder to work through the problems that face the school district. So there's a reason that you are this group, and it's the reason they filled the empty spot with you, Michael, and the reason that you try to hit the ground running to deal with the future groups. Maintaining confidentiality. So confidentiality comes in a variety of different forms in the school district arena. It comes in the form of communication with the local unions. It comes in the form of student information. It could come in the form of information about property that you're seeking to acquire. There's a myriad of ways that information can become either legally confidential or by statute, or because you determine that it needs to be confidential for a variety of important reasons. We'll get into executive session and the Sunshine Law a little bit later, but for the most part, we have to remember the best way to think about student information is if you're talking about a specific child, you probably shouldn't be talking about it outside of speaking to the superintendent or a principal. And I can think of very few situations where board members would be in a position to speak directly to a principal about a student issue. For the most part, I like to recommend that you keep specific individual student information out of your conversations with the local community. There are times in many schools where one student issue may come up, whether it's a discipline issue or something else, and it might be kind of a hot topic on social media or something along those lines. It should never be spoken of outside of the official processes that it might be encompassing within the school. Specifically, the law on student information is called the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, FERPA, and it specifically authorizes people who are required to have the information and use the information within the educational setting to have and use information. If you don't have a specific educational purpose to communicate information that you have within this setting, you shouldn't do it. Listen to the community, but refrain from committing the board as an individual. That goes back to the other things I've been saying. Again, you want to avoid that situation. One of the reasons you want to avoid it, quite frankly, is because you don't want to overpromise. You may not have all the information. You may hear, I know it's hard to believe, but in a grocery store, you may only hear half of the story. Okay, so if you commit or you promise a certain outcome, either directly or through innuendo, you may not be able to deliver, and you may find out there's a lot more to that story than you thought there was. So that's important as well. When it comes to making good decisions, obtain information from as many sources as you can, and do not ever operate on rumor and circumstance. Rumor and circumstance are the enemy of good operations, the enemy of good entities of any sort, whether it's a public school or any other organization that has to operate with the human element. So getting the information, getting the correct information just couldn't be more important. Absolutely guarding your reputation and the reputation of the rest of the board. You are all in this together, okay? What happens at 35,000 feet if one of the engines go out? It's a long trip to the ground. It is so important that each of you remember that at the end of the day, it's the kids, and it's the kids who are the goal. And so when you're looking at your reputation and the reputation of the board, it is so, so important that you guard it. Work through your disagreements. That takes a lot of effort on everybody's part. That's that whole, if you look at, here's a good example, crowd surfing. How many of you have ever been to a concert and saw crowd surfing? Well, if you jump off of a stage, one person is not going to catch you, okay? But if you jump off the stage and there's 5 of you standing there, guess what? Suddenly you're crowd surfing, okay? Really, really important to work through your disagreements so you can end up at the end of all of this feeling that joy of crowd surfing as opposed to crowd crashing, which is not nearly as fun. But I've seen that happen as well. Again, refusing special interest, pressure, compromising when it's in the best interest of kids. Knowing that you do speak as a board, knowing that you can gather all the information and still, at the end of the day, you can have differences of opinion. Differences of opinion are okay, but you have to look at what your goal is. And if your goal is the best interest of kids, then maybe you can come to a consensus. Maybe you can compromise so that you can speak as one voice. Focus on the issues, never the personalities. That is really hard because we are all human, but it is so, so important to consider that not just a goal, not just an idea, but an aspiration for each of your interactions with one another. Obviously, respecting all views. Some of these I've already touched upon, but the last one I love, use common sense. Isn't common sense really probably one of the most important guiding principles of what we do? I think that trying to get through it, trying to communicate, these two try to communicate with the information they have. The treasurer and superintendent have so many responsibilities pulling upon them, from the requirements to make sure that grants are being spent properly, kids are being fed properly. There's enough salt, okay? Somebody has to make sure there's enough salt to get through a winter. And we don't know if the winter is going to be a rainy winter with no salt needed, or 35 to 60 feet of snow and all of a sudden everybody's out of salt. Somebody has to figure that out, and he is the one who has to make sure that whoever it is in the district that's responsible for that does the best job they can at forecasting how much we're going to need. So when it comes to expectations and such, just try to do your best on understanding that common sense has to come into play as well. Aspiring to excellence and expecting it from everyone. Let's see, where am I? Here we go. Let's see, actively demonstrating integrity, respect. These are common sense. Do not use the media. Why is this moving on its own?
There it goes.
Okay. Okay, yep. Do not use the media to air dirty laundry. Now that, in 2017, I don't even think that this meant as much as it means now then. When I first started in this business, the way that my office communicated with me was with a pager. And the pager had a little red light readout. And a phone number would come upon it, and I would call back to the office to see what I needed to do or whatever it was. So much has happened. We are living in a media world that makes almost no sense to me. I also remember waiting for the newspaper to see what was going to be said about this, that, or the other. And really, we are in real time with information now. Everything is happening in real time. We are getting our information in real time. By the time it hits paper to be printed, it is old news. It's irrelevant. Something else has already happened. But the other piece of that is that we live and die from it. How many of you are sitting close to a some kind of a digital item? Matt, you have yours. There's a computer there, computer there. Brad, where's your phone? In your pocket, you have it on you. Linda, you have your phone nearby, right there. Julie, you've got one open. You've got one open. You've also got your phone there. We cannot get away from it. People take them into the bathroom because they can't be away from them long enough to run into the restroom. So it's an instantaneous world. What that means is you can communicate hurtful things that have a lasting impact instantly. And I don't even think our kids grasp how important that is. I think we need to live by example, or lead by example, rather. I think it's so important that we always do everything we can to treat each other, to treat this institution, this school district, with care and love, and make sure that you're not putting things out that you can't take back. I always say you can't unring a bell. Once it's done, it's done. So it's so important that we take close care about how we do that, because social media, if there's anything I could erase from the world, that's it. If there's that one thing, if I was, what's it, not Aladdin, what was the genie's name in Aladdin?
Genie.
Genie?
Genie.
Oh, that was his only name.
That was his only name.
I think it was Jim.
Okay, so if I was Genie for a day, that's what I would do. I would erase all social media and let us get back to actually communicating again. So trust your administration and their institutional knowledge. I already said that. Take advantage of professional development opportunities. I can't say that one enough. Oh gosh, I've been doing this for 21 years. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. You just never, ever, ever get done with being better, right? You've never gotten to that point where you can say, oh, I'm done. I'm good. I have learned it all. That's not how it works. That's not how it operates. Take advantage of them and then have those conversations. If you learn something that excites you, communicate that to your other board members. Because what I love about going to those types of events is that I always walk away newly energized, newly excited for what we do and how we do it. So don't be afraid of that. Seeking stability and continuous improvement. Stability. So important, so key to have institutional knowledge within your district and to understand where you've been, how you got to where you are now, and how you're going to go on to the next great mission, great goal, great outcome. And for public schools, that's kids getting the best education they can and going off and making us proud in ways we haven't even imagined yet. That's the beauty of the kindergartners right now. We have no idea what they're going to accomplish for us when they're grown up. And then the courage to be able to take on every challenge that comes to you every day and do the best you can with it. Gather the most information you can and do the best with it. Okay, let's go back to another one of your board policies, just because some of what I have said, you say, okay, that's great, but how does it apply to us? Well, a lot of what I have just reviewed is also in your code of ethics, your code of conduct for board members, board policy 0123. So again, you have to remember your first and greatest concern is the education and the welfare of all students, obeying the laws. We talked about confidentiality, delegating authority for the administration of schools to the superintendent and staff. Now, I've already said that, but I like the way it says it there, okay? Because again, I said you have to trust them. You have to delegate that. You have to believe that they're going to do what you've asked them to do. You have an evaluation procedure to deal with it. But when it comes to the policies that you create, you just have to delegate and let them do their jobs and know that they've got the education and the background and the experience to accomplish what you want them to accomplish. Communications, making sure that you communicate. You know, again, on the issue of the grocery store conversation, when it occurs, and we all know it does, not being afraid to pick up your cell phone and call, whether it's Matt, whether it's somebody else that you absolutely know that is the right person to communicate it to, but make sure there's no surprises. Make sure that you get the information moved to the person who needs it, who can process it and address it as quickly as possible. I find that, you know, this weekend, our heat went out at home, and of course it's in the 40s. And so first thing in the morning, this morning, I called the HVAC guy, our boiler guy, and I said, hey, our heat's out. And he said, why didn't you call over the weekend? And I said, because I didn't want to pay the weekend fee. I mean, you know, we have blankets, we have a fireplace. And he said, geez, you have my cell phone. Use it, Donna, use it. And so, you know, again, every day we are reminded that communication is the key to success. I could have been warm on Sunday night instead of freezing all weekend under every blanket we had in the house. So, all right, make every effort to attend all board meetings. Board meetings are essential. Work sessions are essential. I love it when I see board meetings with 5 board members, because that's how you get stuff done. Everybody hears the information that's presented. Everybody can react to the information that's presented, and questions can be asked, and everybody can hear the answers to the questions. It's just the best way. It makes you informed. Support employment based on qualifications. If the superintendent brings to you people that he is recommending, he has vetted them. He has vetted them through a process. It's not like in the old days where somebody walks into the superintendent's office, you know, just kind of cold and does a quick interview and then he makes a recommendation. No, there is a process. In every district that I work with, there is a process for hiring, and it's a long process. It's not an easy process. And at the end of it, the administration makes the very best recommendation they can based on the information they have. You know, if it gets through all of that and it seems like the right thing, if you have questions, that's okay. It's okay to have questions, but make sure that the questions are based on the right motivations and never involve personality conflicts. Avoiding conflicts of interest. Now, I could do an entire presentation on conflicts of interest. That's an entire other area. You do have a board policy on it. I'm not going to bore you with it, but I'll tell you that conflicts of interest cause trouble. Conflicts of interest cause legal issues. Conflicts of interest cause embarrassment. There's a variety of things. Avoid them. You've already been trained on them. Again, it's an entire topic unto itself, but it is really important. Refrain from using your board position to benefit yourself, your family members, and your business associates. That's part of the law regarding conflicts of interest. Express your personal opinions, but once the board has acted, accept the will of a majority. Again, this goes to you're a board. You're not an individual when it comes to board action. It happens a lot, but it's painful for a school community. Once a school board has made a decision to have 1, 2 board members, potentially more than after the fact, either doing a buyer's remorse thing. Buyer's remorse on a board action usually means you didn't have all the information. It means you didn't do the work ahead of time. Okay? Make sure you do the work that's necessary to make sure you are comfortable with whatever the outcome is. And then once it is decided upon, that is the decision. Okay? Now, I have seen situations where boards don't have all the information. They find out additional information after the fact. It always results in pain and suffering. Now, I don't mean literal pain, but I do mean pain and suffering. It's hard to go through that process of making a decision and then having to go back on the decision and do something else. It also can be costly to go through that process, depending on what the decision was, to go back and make another decision. Years ago, I remember a school district that had to pass a levy because they believed that they were in dire financial straits. There was a variety of reasons that went into it, but ultimately they found out after a few months that they were in better condition than they thought they were. But they had already got the taxpayers and the voters to pass the levy. That's a really hard situation to be in and not one you want to be in. It creates a lot of difficulty. Always seek to build better relationships. Don't underestimate the importance of that. Set clear goals for the superintendent and treasurer. Your goal setting should be annual, and it should be revisited throughout the year. What your goals are and whether or not you are accomplishing them tells you whether or not you are staying at 35,000 feet or if you're wavering. Be committed to that. And I know superintendents and treasurers across the state communicate what they're looking to accomplish. And being informed and setting those goals and making sure that everybody has what they need to get to where you believe you need to go, it's essential, and it's time consuming. This board is another job. You may each have a job during the day. You have another job now. Some of you have had this job for a long time. This is a job, and you have to treat it like that. And that means gathering as much information as you can and really pitching in on the issue of maintaining the direction of the plane towards the goals. All right, some practical advice and suggestions on legal counsel. I am sitting here training you. Training is a fantastic opportunity for using legal counsel. Districts have the ability to use legal counsel to keep them to deal with the many legal challenges that you have to deal with when you operate as a board of a school district. The things that you can get into that you would never even imagine, from discrimination issues, property cases, labor issues, USDA violations for handling of food and different issues with grant funds, and the myriad goes on and on and on, and it can be staggering. Knowing how best to stay abreast of the changing laws, utilizing people like me. I know you guys use other folks, and the folks who are dedicated to school law are not dedicated to one area of law. We're not just tax attorneys. We're not just employment attorneys. We are a unique creature in this field of law. We have to know more different types of law than many other practitioners do, and it's a beautiful thing. And if you use it right, it can be extremely effective. Prior to incurring legal expense, recommend that you carefully understand the things that apply to you. Your collective bargaining agreements. Talk to your board and your principals about some of the things going on there. Understanding your board policy. Knowing the ins and outs of your student code of conduct if in fact you have to deal with a student discipline matter, which do occasionally come before you. Understanding, usually the treasurer's office handles some of the issues associated with liability insurance. Liability insurance is so important. It can help save your budget. I mean, quite frankly, it can save your general fund. So know the ins and outs of that and stay up to date on it. Understand the impact of some of the legal things that happen, whether it's a labor arbitration that could affect some district operations, whether it's a court case that can affect district operations. Know what those are, understand, and then do they mean that there needs to be some amendment to the protocols and the processes in the district? Be willing and open-minded to look at those things and determine what might have to happen. Control the number of persons who are authorized to contact. I can't think of a single well-oiled board of education where every board member is calling the lawyer. They don't go hand in hand. If every board member is calling the lawyers, you got a problem. It's important that you know who is authorized and on what topics, and make sure it goes through some process. Anticipate hot button issues and know how to deal with them. Look, the best legal fees you can spend are the ones that keep you out of legal trouble. The preventative medicine is always, always better than having to call us after you're in the soup. So communicating with your superintendent and treasurer and knowing how best to use them is so key. And then making sure that the staff in the district is also well trained. Obviously, a big issue right now is Title IX. Title IX training had to occur. It's very, very important. There's a myriad of other training. Obviously, sexual harassment's been a big issue in the news over the last few years. Having training on that issue, it's not a bad idea. It helps to keep, nobody intends to run afoul of these laws, but refreshers don't hurt. And then, of course, being proactive, not waiting till the last minute. There are deadlines associated with the variety of these things. It's always important to make sure that we're there. I have now hit 1 hour of talking. I'm going to take a sip. Now, obviously, I've got some more in my outline, but I am happy to take questions instead of digging into the next topic. You can always look at these outlines and digest some of this stuff. I know some of this, Michael, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to be trained on the Sunshine Law. That is part 2 of the outline, starting at page 8. Okay. If you haven't yet, you will be. Okay. I'm happy to just take questions at this time or engage in any kind of discussion you wish to at this point.
I think, as I go through this, I was just kind of circling and starring things that kind of resonated with me, because I think that we probably all have different perspective on some of the things in here that kind of hit us and go, oh, maybe we should work on this, or we're strong in this area and things like that. One of the things that kind of resonated with me, though, was that when we were talking about obtain facts from several sources, do not operate on rumor or circumstance. Yeah, I think to your point is that, we get hit from so many different angles, whether it's walking through the grocery store, to social media, to email, or whatever it may be, right? And so I just always have to remember, I think that for our community to understand too, is that, we represent nearly 100,000 residents, 17,000 students, and nearly 2,000 employees. And with that means that there's not just one avenue, right? I think sometimes, especially with social media, we tend to believe what's posted on social media is the truth, and that, oh, this person posted or that group posted it, and that's what's wrong with the district, and we need to fix that. But the reality is, how do we take a step back from a board and really listen to our administration, who has way more data, to maybe help us inform that decision that we're making as a board? And so I just say that because I think that's something that I feel the tension that exists all the time. It's way easier when you get off social media, but it's just a tension that I think exists within our community. And how do we as a board react to it?
I think that probably the most important part of what you just said is within that is that listening factor. Is you absolutely have to be a good listener, and sometimes the best way to get to a positive outcome is to do what my kid. I have twin 8-year-olds, twin girls. Okay, and so when you're my age, my gray hairs that I've earned over this life, and I have 8-year-olds at home. I love what I hear from them sometimes, and everybody's heard the cliche. I don't hate cliches, because cliches have earned their moniker, right? I mean, there's a reason that they're tried and true comments. And so my kids come home and they say to either their friends or sometimes to me, Mom, are you wearing your listening ears? And I think that in those situations, if you put on your listening ears and you think, so you said 100,000 constituents, okay, 100,000 constituents. That means there's a certain number of people within this community who only know your name.
Mhm.
There's a whole bunch of people who have no idea you even exist, okay? But there's a whole bunch of people who know your name, might know your face, but don't know you.
Mhm.
Then you have another layer of people that you do know who are within your acquaintances. Then you have another layer of people who are your friends and your closer circle. Then you have your family, okay? There's all these different levels of access to you when you become a board member. And it is so important to manage that, to know that, okay, I operate as one of the engines on a big plane.
Mhm.
Okay, I operate that way, and I have to remember that even when I encounter these situations. And again, what you hear in a aisle of the grocery store is not always going to be the whole story. And determining the best way to filter that through so that that little moment of listening turns into a positive outcome. Now, sometimes that little moment of listening could have no outcome at all because it turns out that information didn't really pan out to be accurate.
Mhm.
But if somebody has a misperception about something that's going on, it might be a communication issue that needs to be dealt with from central office. Okay, because sometimes there might be a question or concern that's already being addressed. It's just the way it's being addressed has not been filtered through our information sources to that person that found you, in aisle 12.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
Other thoughts? Questions? Comments?
I think what Brad just spoke to, I think is often a challenge. And I think especially when I first joined the board, something I struggled with and something people warned me about,
Mhm.
when I joined, that you're going to hear something. And I think I probably overreacted, particularly at first, to things because, I love the expression, no matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always two sides. And I think that's very true because you hear something and you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, oh, when you hear that other side. But it is a challenge, and you do, as people, you want to fix things. You want to be the person to fix it. And it's hard sometimes to flip that to somebody else to be the fixer.
Mhm.
But as you've indicated, that's our role, and it's hard. And that can be a challenge.
You have to have really thick skin to do this job too. You have to have,
Well,
because people, like you said, you want to fix and you see things, for instance, on social media that are not true.
Yeah.
But you cannot react. We have been told we do not react to social media posts by trying to, and it gets legs of its own. I mean, people who appear to be experts post something and then people tag on, and it just gets to the point where you want so badly to say, that is not what's happening.
I guess, what is your opinion on that? Like, we've been asked by our communication department to not speak because then it can become an issue if we say something that's incorrect, or we're then appearing to speak for the board when it's us speaking as individuals. How do you manage that or feel about that?
So I guess I'll say this. Experience has shown me that you can never, never, never put out a fire with more fire.
Yeah.
I think that the best way to handle social media, which is just, again, if I were a genie, I think that it's just so important to remember that other entities may have the answer to the misconception that is fueling the fire on social media. So, what are the types of things that cause social media fires? Parent perceptions of how specific policies affect their kids frequently creates social media firestorms. Specific activities where an event has occurred, whether it's band or a sports event or something like that. There is almost always somebody who knows more about the situation than the person on social media does. That's why it's really not helpful when you separate into individuals, okay, and try to address those things. The best way to do it is to look at what you're seeing on social media, communicate it back to the administration, let the administration figure out a good communication plan for the issue. Now, in some instances, that communication plan is not for the entire community's eyes. If it's a situation that, if it's a fire that grew out of a one or a small group of kids, it could be that the administration needs to figure out who are the grown-ups who need to sit and have communications with the folks who are upset. And that fire can be put out very quickly through the right communication to the right people. Just because there's a social media firestorm going on doesn't mean that the entire community needs to be involved in that fire. So sometimes if you see the fire on social media, you communicate about it as quickly as you can to the folks who can then delegate it down to the folks who have the information who can address the issue. For instance, with lunch, did a child not receive a lunch or a milk for some reason? Well, what happened? Let's have the folks who are in the know and were there that day, let's have them handle it, as opposed to making comments on social media. So yes, my recommendation, my philosophy, my experience tells me that trying to bat down a fire as one person on social media is just never going to work. Give it to the people who are the experts. Give it to the people who know what to do. Let them figure out the best way to respond. If it's a small group that needs to be addressed, or is it a larger district-wide communication that needs to be put out to correct a misperception? I'm not sure what you think.
It's good, thank you.
Anyone? Anyone?
Bueller.
All right. Well, I know you have more work to do. The most exciting part of the evening is the treasurer's presentation. I've always heard that over the years.
It is
It
always
is
our favorite part.
Always the best loved part.
We appreciate you
Yes, thank you
coming
so
here,
much.
Donna. Thank
Very
you
helpful.
so
I
much.
appreciate
Donna, we,
your
Poor
time.
Michael's probably a little
This is good.
overwhelmed, but
Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
We agree with you that not going to OSBA this year is it's sad because
Kinda sad.
we get a lot of professional development, and as you stated in here, professional development for the board is really important. But I also think too, we've experienced from going to OSBA Capital Conference and also NSBA is that you get to hear other board members' perspectives and things that they're doing in their districts, and it helps you calibrate your
right.
experience. And it also, I think, helps calibrate, you know, again, you live in this area of tension constantly, and then it kind of reaffirms that you're sitting in the right place and you're doing what you need to be doing. So we're appreciative of you driving all the way
We
down
are
here
very much.
for a long time in order to be here a short time, but we're appreciative of you and what you shared with us in our community. And I know that we as a board are appreciative and hope to continue to do better.
Well, we're not that far away. We have an office I hear is close by. I know there was a football game.
Oh.
I have to say, I like your prospects with your quarterback.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Yes.
He just needs some help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Donna.
All right,
much.
thank Donna, thank you so much.
Safe travels back. Be able to follow that act, Jenny? No.
Okay. Logan, Miss Logan, I forgot the miss in front of it.
Like it's just.
Logan, Miss Logan?
Okay, well, tonight, what I wanted to do is start the conversation on the 5-year forecast. has it been 1 or 2 years? This will be the second year that we will approve the forecast in November versus October. Used to be October, and they switched that. So we have a little bit more time. But what I want to do tonight is to talk to you mainly about the assumptions, because we need to agree that the assumptions are okay before we talk about the numbers. And I'm going to pass something out. I'm going to be like a teacher. You don't get to see the draft and it's plastered all over it until we talk through the assumptions. But I want to talk about the assumptions because that's how you get the numbers. It's not the other way around. So again, it's November forecast that we will be approving. We have one board member and one board meeting in November. And that used to be, our calendar was all around Capitol Conference and Thanksgiving. And so, who knew? So as we're looking at the forecast, the first thing we're going to look at and talk about are the revenue assumptions. And so when we talked in May, there were some things that we discussed and we assumed as far as revenue. I know more now than we did in May. I've had conversations with the county auditor's office. And so as far as our tax revenue, we are predicting that for this reappraisal that will impact collection of calendar year 21, an increase in our values for class 1, which is residential and agricultural values, and a 7% increase in class 2, which is our business value. Delinquencies, when I look at what we have collected, the delinquencies, and this is a good thing, we're not there as we predicted or that we anticipated. So we're going to estimate 0.5% in delinquencies, and we'll see how it goes. But so far, so good. State funding is the big hit that we have had with our revenues, and we know this. Had a conversation with ODE today, and again was told that not to predict any more cuts to state funding, which is good. So that 7% reduction that we saw last year is still here this year. But in talking to folks around the state and other colleagues, most of us are predicting to return to FY19 levels in FY22. Wow. And then 23 through 25, I don't think it's realistic to say there will be no growth and we'll be at FY19 levels throughout. So 0.5% increase seems reasonable, unless you tell me otherwise. And interest income, I don't know if any of you have seen this in your own personal portfolios, but we're anticipating and estimating a 57% reduction in interest income this year. Our expenditures are.
Do you want us to ask questions as we go along?
Go right ahead.
Okay. With the fiscal year 22 returning to the 19 levels, is that just flat with the 21 level? Is that a further reduction?
So this year is the reduction, and then next year we're anticipating that it would go back up to the 19 prior to reductions. So FY19 did not have a reduction in it. Last year, FY20 had a reduction. This year has a reduction.
Okay.
So we're anticipating next year to go back pre-reductions, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then with the real estate tax revenue, with the estimated increase at 15%, I know there's been a lot of articles of the dispute that the county's having with the state, but it sounds like they're not having a lot of success. They're
Correct.
still sticking with the 15 versus the 20 that they're being currently told they're going to need to hold to?
So
or-
we've got two townships, as we know.
Okay.
The 20% is really, speaking of Westchester Township,
Okay,
Liberty Township, they were not, they're not looking at that 20.
Okay.
So it's kind of
Averaging
meeting
out.
in the middle. The state could come back and it could be more than 15. We'll find out. I think they have one more time they can file an appeal, and then we'll
It's done.
hear more.
okay, thank you.
Mhm. Other questions on this? Expenditures, our two biggest expenditures is going to be, as with any service industry, is your people. So your salaries and benefits. Both our union contracts expire at the end of this fiscal year. So we will be entering into negotiations. Just one more thing to add to the list. But as far as trying to estimate what wages are going to look like post-COVID, my recommendation is to only put the COLA into the forecast. We have a COLA for our teaching staff and a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, for our non-certified folks, and they're two different ones. So if you average them together and weight them appropriately, it's a 1.58% increase that would be there for just the cost of living adjustment, and not putting any type of estimate or trying to predict what anything would be on a base, which is different than what we've done in the past, but this is different times. Healthcare rates, we do have, we've got a pretty good deal with our health insurance and keeping that flat. But in January of 22, we will be looking at what we will have to look beyond the contract that we have currently with Medical Mutual. So we're estimating it would be a 5% in FY22, because those are based on calendar years. And this would be just part of that calendar year that we could see an increase. Beyond that, 7.5%. Again, along with everything else with COVID, trying to predict and looking at claims when people weren't going for any type of surgeries or what have you, trying to predict what's going to happen with insurance rates is another area that's quite challenging right now. Our purchase services, as we know, we started freshman busing this year, so we're going to see some increases for that with purchase services. Our sub cost, we believe those will be back up to pre-COVID, as well as we're doing some things around subs and making sure that we have staff appropriately in our building. So that one is not going to reduce like it did last year. We're looking at that as pre-COVID and even higher possibly. PD, we aren't traveling, as we just talked about Capitol Conference. You know, if we're doing PD, we're doing it sometimes at our homes or what have you. It's virtually, so we think we'll see some cost savings there. We're also building out online curriculum. So yes, we did get some CARES money that will help us with some of that, but not all of that. So there are some things that This is the first time really it's been on the forecast, but we're trying to take all of those things into account. And these are just things that are just notable to just be aware of this time. Supplies and equipment, we continue to focus on the thing at hand right now, and to be ready with all of those things. COVID ready. The bottom line, when we look at this forecast, as we did in May, it's going to look different. We're going to see a spending deficit that we're estimating for this fiscal year, which is the first time in, I think we had 8 years where there was not a spending deficit and we were building up a cash balance. Thank goodness, because we're now able to not panic because of some of this, but look at it strategically and see how long it's going to last and get through it. The rainy day fund, if we do the transfer, we'll have over $5 million sitting in the rainy day fund. That's a good thing. Our cash balance, depending on how long this lasts, depending on what is going to happen with state revenue in the next biennium, it's going to be impacted. But, and I was speaking to Mr. Pearl on the way in, trying to look beyond 1 year right now. Wow. But we're meeting the requirements. We're filing a 5-year forecast. But more than any time in my entire career, trying to look out to the 5th year is ridiculous. It is just ridiculous right now. But at the same time, we need to try to plan so that we can be prepared and see, you know, what the future could hold. In summary, the pandemic continues to impact us financially as well as with everything else. State revenues, while we've seen that reduction last year and this year, as I said, we're predicting to return just to FY19 levels next year. So that's a hole, and it will take us years to get back to where we need to get to. Our expenditure trends for a lot of areas are trending back to pre-COVID, but there's some additional ones there. And there's some things that are different, like I mentioned with PD. That one's different. And like I said, the bounce back of all of this, we believe that our local tax base it looks good right now. Will that continue to be into the future? I think it'll depend on how long this lasts. When I hear from our state leaders, what they have told us is when they look at their estimates and the revenue that's coming in, it's better than they anticipated. When they look at income tax levels and that it's better than they anticipated. But then they also say, well, a lot of that is because the people who are out of work are your lowest wage earners. And so some of them aren't even paying into income tax. So I think we have to be aware of that, because when we look at our 17,000 kids, some of those come from those homes where revenue might look great and the predictions are better than we anticipated, but not for everyone. So, you know, I know we decided not to charge school fees this year. And so those are some of the things that go through my mind too. And we are officially over 17,000. Yeah, we looked at those numbers. Yeah, so.
Did we make changes in our assumptions of the kids that were going into like the other online programs versus staying inside for our virtual program? Did we see changes in those numbers or make changes in assumptions?
We did, and we just looked at that actually this month. We get payments twice a month from the state, and in our second payment in October, we got some updated numbers. And for the students who, I just happen to have that, the students who are attending community schools, and that would be the online schools as well, that ADM, that enrollment went up 73 students. It was a 45% increase.
That's great.
So that will also impact our expenditures, because the way that's handled is it's deducted from our money that they send us, and it's sent to
Right.
the community schools. So again, this information just came. We don't have all of the information. It comes in bits and pieces, but that piece did come in our second.
What was
So
our, oh, go for it.
I had several questions.
Okay.
The first is about Ed Choice. Did you put an assumption in here about Ed Choice, since as far as we know, as of right now, it will kick back in February?
So last year we had 4, and this year we have 9. So that, yes, that is included in here as
9
well.
students?
9 students.
Okay, and so in February, there's a possibility, you have not included anything further if we get further going in February.
I've kept it steady, so I'm not estimating that it will be a big hit to us beyond that. But
So with our VLO enrollment, were you anticipating that we would stay with that nearly 4,000 for VLO for next year? Or are you anticipating post-COVID that would change? And even what did you hear today, if you can give us any feedback on how many kids might be coming back?
Talk loud.
It's on.
They can't hear you on Zoom though if you don't
We
talk.
anticipate just the early numbers that we just started collecting that ended today.
Mhm.
Probably about 1,000 students coming back at semester, roughly 25%. Give or
And-
take.
And then for next year, are you still anticipating 3,000 to 4,000?
I would think that number would probably go down again, but I don't know. It just really depends on the unpredictable pandemic.
Okay,
I'm not surprised by the 25% coming back now, because they've seen how things are going so far.
thank you.
Yep.
And Jenny, one last question. We had talked about, you had in your last presentation, COVID revenue, so to speak, with grants and CARES Act and all the rest of that, but you didn't have COVID cost yet. Do you have COVID costs that you can present to us, or is it that at our next meeting?
so I am hoping that not hoping, at the board meeting where we will, I'll present this for adoption. I will also present to you, I will add to the presentation the ongoing spreadsheet where we're tracking this. And it will include things like this. We have a COVID response team. And when I started asking members of the COVID response team, what percentage of your day are you spending on the COVID response team? And so we're tracking that as well to say, these individuals, and now, and I'm not kidding, I heard 50%, 60%, along with doing their regular day.
Along with weekends.
Along with weekends. So we're trying, as every time we sit down and talk about this, it's like, well, what about that? What about that? So it isn't just things that we think of normally, like PPE and, you know, those kind of things, but building subs, we said to every building, you're authorized to have a building sub. Well, having a building sub for all of the buildings and saying that that's going to be your dedicated, there's
So
a
by a
cost
building sub, somebody who shows up every day, no matter where they're.
every day.
Okay.
Yes. And so there's a cost to that. So we're trying to put all of those things together. And you'll see that there's not enough money coming in from the feds and the states to cover all of those things. The other reason we're putting that together too, Linda, is because, and I don't know if any of you saw that survey.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Did you?
So I was on a call last week to kind of help come up with some of those questions. So we'll be reporting that as well, because we're trying to show the need that, hey, we can use some extra money.
But there's money left is what they're saying in that email, right?
I
Yeah.
think it's great you're capturing the man hours and those other intangibles as well. I think that's positive, but we will have some kind of a summary at our next meeting then.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you both.
Sure. Any other questions? It's a year like no other on
Right.
all levels.
God
so-
bless you and your team.
And honestly, I typed it for myself more than anything else is it's just not a time to panic on this. It just really isn't. I mean, when I look at these numbers and I'm gonna, so take one and pass it down and you're gonna see draft. But when I look at the numbers for Lakota, seeing a spending deficit and seeing that, you know, our cash is going down, it's alarming to me. But then when I dig into it and I look at, oh my gosh, who knows what's going to happen? We're trying to make assumptions post-COVID that, I mean, it's like a crystal ball is not helping right now. So
You need the genie.
yeah, I need the genie, but we have done so much to prepare for a rainy day, a storm, and the storm is upon us, and we're ready. We're ready. We have to remember the things we learned years ago to get us out of a difficult storm. We have a great person sitting in this seat, and I have confidence that we're going to get back to where we need to get to, but it's going to take a little while. It's going to take a little while. We got to be patient.
I appreciate that optimism, Jenny. I do want to note that deficit spending more than we take in is back in this fiscal year's budget. So
Yes, it is.
we have not addressed that yet.
No.
But I think
And
what
we-
I'm hearing Jenny say is that this is not a time to react
Right.
because we're living within 1 year, and which is the reason why we've built up a rainy day. It's a hurricane,
Yeah.
and why we have the cash balance. And so I think it goes back to that comment that I had made back in May, and I don't know if this is the right analogy, but you know, the idea that, you know, I don't know if we truly know right now if we have a revenue issue or an expenditure issue. Right? Like we know that we have revenue issues with the state, but we don't know if those are going to be fixed next year or the following year. You're saying fiscal year 19 into 23, but we also know that the Cup-Patterson
Mhm.
funding model is also getting pitched at the moment too. We don't know what the state's coming back with. And then we also, on the expenditure side, we don't know what next year is going to look like in regards to how many kids are in VLO, what COVID restrictions. And so in my head, like, I think that I try to process this around the fact of, we have a cash balance, we have a rainy day fund. We don't know about revenue expenditures, so it's not time to panic. And I love kind of how you stated that, because I would sure hate to start down this path of saying, let's reduce, cut, and then it not be nearly as bad. And then those programs or those services are gone away.
And we have to get back on that path of the balanced budget. But right now,
So much unknown.
we not operating the way we are. And it's the best thing right now. We're all back. And we're doing what we have to do to keep operating in the manner that we are in. If we were remote, we could have saved some dollars, but that wasn't what was best.
Right.
This is a costly solution, and it's the right solution. But because of that, there's not much savings really to look at this year.
Right.
As we move forward, we'll be able to analyze and, like you said, Brad, see if there's some expenditures that we, can hit. And we know how to do all of those things. We've done it before. We can do it again. But the revenue piece is going to lag for some time.
Right.
So
But
We
it
just
should
have
be
to
an
have a
ongoing
plan.
discussion. When we look at the end of the 5-year forecast and there's a $12 million deficit, we're spending that much more. That's when I came on the board. So not wanting to return to those days, it needs to be an ongoing discussion with the board.
It has to be an ongoing, but who knows, that 5th year, it's just, yes, it's alarming to look at that, but it
could change 10 times. in the next-
change. And I'm hoping that on this, I haven't been as optimistic as, well, but I think we've been conservative, as we always try to be. And our goal is to make that look better,
Right.
to figure out how to get through this.
And it's
we
far
will.
easier to look at that now than it is when it becomes 12 million. That's a serious
Absolutely.
hit. So
Absolutely. Mhm.
All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
At the Butler Tech meeting, when they presented the 5-year forecast, they didn't even show out to the 5th year because he just said, right now, there's so many variables that could change. He did a 2-year snapshot.
Yeah. By law, we have to file 5. but
Right.
I agree. It's
Because it's the unknown. It's like, we've never been in this position before.
Yeah.
Again, kudos to you, Adam, and your team, because this can't be easy.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think it's important for the community to understand too, that you guys have already started looking at the budgets, doing reductions heading into this year. And so it's not that we're just sitting by, not doing anything. Every department's being looked at. Reductions are happening across the board where,
Yeah, you did the 20%
We did.
reductions across the board
Yeah.
this year.
we did
so-
building budgets. They were
right?
departments. Yeah.
All right, great. So this brings us to, if there's no other questions, comments, we'll go into public comment. We didn't have any submitted by email. Do we have anybody in person that wants to speak to the? Okay, anybody on? Okay, Ms. Bruce. Just a reminder, state your name, address, and you're limited to 3 minutes. Ms. Bruce, unmute, please.
Hi, it's Suzanne. I actually didn't mean to do that. I'm so sorry. You've been like kind of in my pocket on and off. So I apologize.
No problem.
Kathleen? Kathleen, unmute, please. Are you there, Kathleen?
I'm right along with the other person. You've been in my pocket.
No worries, no worries.
These are the best kind of questions.
Right, I mean,
thanks for dropping in.
okay, all right, so it looks like there's no, I would say no other public comments, but nobody wanted to participate, so that moves us on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Ms. Logan?
Mrs. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Schaefer,
Yes.
Mrs. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Pearl,
Yes.
Mr. Lovell.
Yes. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.